What are some of the first things that come to mind when you think of the Canary Islands? Perhaps it's the image of tourist-filled bars and restaurants lining seafronts and beaches, or maybe it's the quaint white villages dotting rocky landscapes filled with pleasant and humble locals. For most people, it's likely one of the two things just mentioned, but long before the Canary Islands became the sun-seekers' dream destination it's known as today, or even populated by sociable Spaniards, the archipelago was once inhabited by a very different group of people. These people are sadly no longer with us, but remnants of their culture still lives on in customs, traditions and folklore across the islands today. In this video, we're going to wind back the clock to a time before Spanish reached the shores of Micronesia and learn of the Indigenous Islanders. This is the story of the Guanches, the gone but not forgotten people of the Canary Islands. A minor point before we begin is that the Guanches were only the inhabitants of the island of Tenerife. The other islands had different tribes such as the Majos of Lanzarote and Fuerteventura and the Canarios of Gran Canaria, as well as other groups settled across the smaller islands of El Hierro, La Palma and La Gomera. However, Guanche is often used as an umbrella term by modern-day Canarian people to refer to all Aboriginal inhabitants of the islands, and so I'll be using the same name interchangeably to refer to the ancient people of the whole archipelago. Based on archaeological discoveries, it's thought the Guanches arrived on the Canary Islands sometime in the 5th century BC, having expanded outwards from North Africa. The settlers were able to build a new home without the need for conquest, as at this time the islands were uninhabited by other humans. However, their arrival did coincide with the extinction of endemic species such as the Canary Island giant lizard and the giant rats of Tenerife and Gran Canaria. According to early European sources, the Guanches were described as tall in stature for the time and were fair-haired with an average height between 165 and 170 centimetres. The Guanches are known to have lived in artificial cave dwellings and had an economy based mainly around agriculture and farming, the main livestock being goats and sheep. Up until the 1400s, the tribes maintained a Neolithic society due to the absence of precious metals and had a hierarchical political system separated between nobility and regular people, with the only access to higher status being based on bloodlines. Strangely, despite being an islander people group, no evidence of ships or vessels have been found, indicating that each tribe lived virtually isolated from one another on their respective island. Like every other ethnic group of humanity, near enough, the Guanches also had their own religion based around the worship of a sun and moon god. And finally, the indigenous people maintained special festival days like the people of today, with the most important date being Benesman or Benesmar, the sharing of meat, wheat and other harvested crops between communities. So now that we have an idea of the original Canary Islanders, the next question to ask is, well, what happened to them? The short answer to this could be summed up simply as European colonisation, and the long answer? Let's look into that now. Until the 1300s, Guanche society had remained relatively isolated from outside contact, bar a few exceptions. The first visit to the Canary Islands by a European since antiquity was sometime around 1312, with the arrival of Lancelotto Malocello, a Genoese captain. His reasons for visiting the islands are unknown, but the captain remained on Lanzarote for nearly 20 years, possibly establishing himself as a ruler over the natives before eventually being expelled by a revolt. Similar expeditions carried out by Portuguese, Italian and Spanish explorers continued over the following decades. In 1341, interest in the Canary Islands grew exponentially after the early depictions of the indigenous inhabitants imagined them as being largely undefended, easy bait for slavery and for conversion to Christianity. What had initially begun as expeditions in the decades prior to the 1370s had in many cases turned into raids by European powers to capture natives for enslavement. And alongside this had also started European Christian missionary work with the aim to have the island under the control of the Catholic Church. And then came the 1400s, the century that led to the collapse of the Guanche way of life. This dark period is known as the conquest of the Canary Islands and was directed under the orders of the Crown of Castile of Spain, which lasted from 1402 to 1496. Due to the timescale involved, we'll save this chapter of the Guanche story for a second part to this week's video. This conquest section of Canarian history was particularly brutal and, as we'll explore soon, was some of the earliest examples of European colonisation of indigenous peoples. I hope you enjoyed this first part to the Guanche story. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and be sure to keep an eye out for part 2 in the near future. I'll see you next time.